So, can you tell me what your school life was like back when you were a kid?
I can. My first memories of schooling was kindergarten, and I was assigned to Miss Gibbons' class, and the school was in a little white building behind the Woodward Annex, and it was up by Dad had his jewelry store on 41 North Main Street, and the schoolhouse was about 2 blocks further to the west, just on Tabernacle Street. And Miss Gibbons was a loving, kind woman, and I remember her being really friendly and helpful. And I remember that the things that she taught me were twofold. The first thing she taught me was how to finger paint, so I could put my fingers in the wet paints and then rub them onto the paper. And I remember I made an outline of my hand, and I painted a little picture one time with clouds, and it was delightful. Second thing she taught me was how to lay on a mat and take a nap. And so we'd roll out our little mats, we little kindergartners, and then we'd lay down and take a little nap for Miss Gibbons. After that, I went to elementary school, and they'd just barely built the East Elementary when I was the first student class in East Elementary, and it was only a block from our home, which was 794 East, 300 South, and the elementary school was on 4th South and 7th East. And I remember going there, and it was a big school. I mean, it probably had 150, 200 kids in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pretty excited to go there. And as I was educated in elementary school, one of the outstanding things that happened to me was in first grade was that I was swinging in a swing, and they had a large tree there. It was a thorn tree, and it stood probably 40 feet tall or 50, and big old branches, and that had thorns on it that were probably 3 or 4 inches long. And when I bailed out of a swing once, I landed on my knees, and I landed on a thorn, and it ran the thorn up into my knee about 2 inches or so, and I squawked a lot. And I hobbled over to the nurse, and she tried to pull it out and wasn't successful very quickly, and so I believe I suffered greatly that first grade class because of the thorn that got into my knee. And so I made sure that I stayed away from that thorn tree from then on when I was swinging.
Ever get any more thorns from that tree?
No, I had a few thorns in my heart. I learned a couple of lessons in elementary school that were not necessarily schoolwork, but they were social. And one of the things I learned is I love to play marbles, and I had some good marbles. Over the time I'd played marbles a little bit, and when I was probably 8, 9, somewhere in there, uh, there were older kids at the school, I remember, and I was probably in middle, so I was probably second or third grade. But one of the older boys, I thought I was pretty good at marbles. One of the older boys would challenge me one time to play marbles with him, and there are two ways to play marbles. One is that you play for fun, and the other is you play for keeps. And keeps means that if you lose the game, that they keep the marbles that they've knocked that are yours. And if you play for fun, they give them back. And I played for keeps because I thought I was pretty good. But I found out this kid had set me up. He was a lot better than I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we started playing, I kept losing marbles. And I was not really happy about that. In fact, I got so upset that finally I yelled at him and said, "I just don't want to play marbles with you anymore." And I threw all my marbles down and walked away really angry. And he gathered all my marbles up and took them home. And so that day I lost all my marbles. And that was a day of great mourning. And after that, I learned that you don't play for keeps unless you really are prepared to do it. We also played softball there, and that was a great time. There's a little tree on the northeast corner that was kind of like a marker, and then we'd set up bases, and it was all a dirt field on the north side of the elementary school. And so as we were playing, I was on the team that was batting, and I was talking with a friend, and I walked past the base, and just as this player had swung at the ball, and they hit me in the head with the bat. And I remember that was probably the first time I remember seeing stars in the middle of the day. And it hit me so hard, and the shock was so great that I remember that it was like a lightning bolt hit my head, and then I wandered around for a minute before I finally figured out that I was still in the ball game, and so we ended up playing ball later on. But that was another thing I learned at elementary, is don't stand too close to the batter if you're playing in a softball game. One of the favorite activities I had as I was getting older and in elementary school was to chase the girls. We played kissing tag. And that was a lot of fun. I remember chasing some girls that were really fast, and I remember that Karen Gubler was the fastest, and nobody ever caught her.
Did you ever catch her?
No, never did. So I had a high admiration for her. She was a good escaper from the kissing tag games. But my teachers were good. I talk a lot about the extracurriculars, but we had good teachers, and I had a Miss Workman and Miss Smoots, and first grade was Mrs. Smoots, and then Miss Workman was second grade, and then I had one that wasn't exactly my favorite, and I won't say who he is because I didn't have much good to say about him. And then my fifth grade teacher was Mr. Hughes, and then sixth grade was Mr. Sullivan. And so I grew older and matured. We'd play football on the south lawn in sixth grade, and I got in one fight in elementary school. Except, I guess I should say I got in one little to-do in Miss Gibbons in kindergarten. A kid by the name of Kenny Snow picked on me, and he whooped me once, and I went home and told Dad, or to the jewelry store actually, and told Dad I had him beating me up, and was crying, and Dad says, well, you've got to figure out what you're going to do about it. Is this still working, Jer? Is it, even though the screen's not gone? Okay. And so in sixth grade, we played horse, and horse is where you'd have one kid stand as the horse and another kid would get on his shoulders, and he was the rider. And so you'd go against each other and try to push the rider off the horse. And I was a horse, and one of my mom's friend's son, Tom Segmiller, was the other horse, and we horses were battling it out, and I think he did something that made me pretty upset, because I told him he was a real cheater and said some harsh words like, you dang mean kid, I'm going to beat you up. And he said, and I kicked him, and he kicked me back. And so we decided that we were going to have a fight after school. So because it was during recess, and when we got back into the class, I thought, well, that was really dumb. I really don't want to go fight with that kid. He probably had hurt me, and I could probably hurt him, and what good would that do? So after school, I didn't go over to fight with him. I just sneaked home, and so then a couple of days later, we saw each other, and I went over and said, well, I'm sorry that I didn't come to fight you. And he says, what do you mean? And I says, well, I just sneaked home. And he says, well, I didn't know that you'd sneaked home, because I sneaked home too. I didn't ever come over to fight you either. And we were friends after that. It was pretty fun. So those are the experiences I had in elementary school, was just learning to be a kid and have fun. I remember in fifth grade, I was the publisher of the school paper, and they had a mimeograph machine, and what that meant is that you cut a stencil, and then you'd attach it to a drum, and then you'd rotate the drum to print off your school newspaper, and I printed off maybe a couple of hundred copies. And I remember that we had to type the stencil and attach it, and if you made a mistake, you either had to strike it out with a typewriter or you had to do the whole thing over. And that really taught me how to be careful about what you're doing when you're writing, because it's permanent on these stencils. And I had a great time doing that. I had made great friends. One of my dear friends in elementary was Gary Picklesheimer, and he and I were the printers of that, and he had a real skill at art, and so I'd use him a lot to, if we were doing a drawing that was going to be printed on the stencil, then he was the one that would do that drawing. And overall, I had a great time. Participated in. I loved sports, and I loved education. I liked to learn. I didn't find that language or spelling or those things were particularly hard, as long as I applied myself to it. But all in all, I had a great time, and we as with other kids, I enjoyed it a lot. I was a little bit timid. I wasn't one that got out and shouted a lot. I kind of was a follower to some of the others, and so overall, it was just a great experience.
Well, thanks for sharing. We'll stop here.
But I'll have to give it to me again. But yeah, stop here. I'll make sure to cut this out. Thank you, Gramps. Hey, I'm vlogging.